Now let's start the video of devolution. So what are going to be the learning outcomes of devolution? Consider the terminology used, look at the meaning of devolution, historical development and sources, most significant statutes. So it is basically a theoretical slide. A lot of theories and informations are given here. Like the terminology of federalism. Federalism is a voluntary form of government and mode of governance, establishing unity while preserving diversity by constitutionally uniting separate political communities into a limited polity. So federalism is basically a type of government that tries to establish the unity while also preserving the diversity of the communities existing in that region. And constitution where legislative function is divided geographically and symmetrically amongst federal and provincial bodies, each enjoying some areas of autonomy. তো এখানে ফেডারেলিজম, তারপর হচ্ছে ডেভলিউশন, যে মূল টার্মিনোলজিটা, ডেভলিউশন মেনলি হচ্ছে একটা বড় এরিয়ার থেকে পাওয়ারটা ছোট একটা এরিয়াতে ভাগ করে দেওয়া। লাইক অনেকগুলো কিংডম নিয়ে অথবা অনেকগুলো স্টেট নিয়ে একটা যদি কান্ট্রি অথবা একটা দেশ গঠন করা হয়, তো পরবর্তীতে সেন্ট্রাল গভর্নমেন্ট এই পাওয়ারটাকে ভাগ করে যখন ওই স্মলার পার্টগুলোতে যখন পাওয়ারটা দেয়, অ্যান্ড দে অলসো এনজয় সাম পোর্শন অফ অটোনমি অ্যান্ড other benefits, তো সেটা হচ্ছে devolution. And then devolution is a delegation of center or legislative executive powers without the relinquishment of sovereignty. Devolution involves the establishment of national legislatures with law-making powers defined in the Constituent Act of the United Kingdom Parliament. So তারা এখানে যে ল মেকিং পাওয়ারটা দিবে ছোট স্মলার পার্টগুলোতে, সেগুলো অবশ্যই ইউনাইটেড কিংডম পার্লামেন্টের সাথে কম্পেটেবল হতে হবে। দ্য ইউকে পার্লামেন্ট রিটাইনস ইজ সভারেন পাওয়ার টু লেজিসলেট ফর দ্য নেশনস। সো ইউকে পার্লামেন্টের র্যাঙ্কিংটা এখানে সবার উপরে, সে হচ্ছে সভারেন পাওয়ারটাকে হোল্ড করতেছে এখানে। সো সোর্সেস অফ ডেভলিউশন, সাম আর দ্য স্কটল্যান্ড অ্যাক্ট অফ 1998 and 2016, Government of Wales Act 1998, 2006, 2017, Northern Ireland Act 1998 and 2009, Greater London Authority 1999, amended in 2007. And court jurisdiction over devolution. Supreme Court assumed jurisdiction in 2009 from the Privy Council and Joint Ministerial Committee on Devolution, JMC is the short form. So remember these short forms as they may also appear in your MCQ questions. The Scotland Act 1998. It was established in a parliament in Edinburgh, and laws or acts of the Scottish Parliament created the Scottish Executive of Health, Education, Justice, Housing. So this act basically describes how Scottish MPs are elected, operation of PARL, how bills become acts of the Scottish Parliament. And the Scotland Act 1998, in section 29, the legislative limitations are mentioned. These are the no amendments to the Scottish Act itself, so there can be no amendments to the Scottish Act that has been produced in the 1998. So no changes to any law outside Scotland, no changes to the European Community laws and obligations, no changes to the Human Rights Act or rights deriving from it. And some of the reserved matters like competence of the Westminster, retaining powers to make law and legislative authority in certain areas remains with the central government. So some certain areas of the authority, they still remain with the central government and they cooperate with one another. The Scotland Act 1998 mentions the union with England and the matters affecting the Crown and the civil service. The Scotland Act of 1998, the Schedule 5, some of the reserved matters. These are the registration and funding of political parties, the UK Parliament, the higher Scottish courts, international relations or foreign affairs, defence and national security, economic and monetary policy, border controls, media policy. The Scotland Act of 1998, mentioned in Section 37, Acts of Union 17.6 are still in force. Only Westminster can override them. Unitary Constitution. So only Westminster can override the laws and acts mentioned in the Acts of Union of 1706, and those laws are still in force. The Scotland Act 1998, the Act does not prevent Westminster from legislating for Scotland. Civil Convention. Normally, Westminster could not legislate on Scottish matters without the consent of the Scottish Parliament. So, Scottish matters would not be legislated without the consent of the Scottish Parliament. So, it is a must. It is mentioned in the Scotland Act of 2016, Section 2. West Lothian question. Enoch Powell, West Lothian was a Scottish county of constituency of the HOC. So it was determined that Westminster MPs cannot sit in Scottish Parliament. So the MPs that are elected in Westminster are not able to sit in the Scottish Parliament. Scottish representatives can vote on matters affecting only England. So the representatives of Scotland can vote on matters that affect on England. Scottish ministers are accountable to Westminster. The Scotland Act of 1998 also says Scottish Parliament has the power to make acts of the Parliament within the sphere of competence laid in the Scotland Act. So the Scottish Parliament can make acts of Parliament, and that must follow and go with the Scotland Act. And Section 28 makes clear that the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament does not affect the power of the Westminster to make laws for Scotland. So the legislative power of the Scottish Parliament does not interfere with the Westminster MPs when they are making laws for the Scotland part. And then the Scotland Act of 2016, additional powers. So Section 2, in Section 28 of the Scotland Act 1998, at the end, additional 8, but it is recognized that Parliament of the United Kingdom will not normally legislate with regard to devolved matters without the consent of the Scottish Parliament. So United Kingdom Parliament will not make any decisions or make any new laws without interfering or without consent of the Scottish Parliament. And codification of the Civil Convention. Miller versus Secretary of the State for exiting the European Union, 2018. So the Supreme Court ruled that the devolved legislatures had no legal veto on the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union. However, the UK government accepted that legislation to implement Brexit does require devolved agreement under the Civil Convention because it changes the powers of the devolved bodies. Supreme Court judgment, the UK withdrawal from the European Union, legal continuity. So when UK was withdrawing from the European Union, they needed some devolved bodies consent, and that is basically because it was mentioned in the Civil Convention. Scottish independence vote, what is the process? So there is a link given in this. I will visit it in our next slides. And then Government of Wales Act 1998 sets up the National Assembly for Wales, limited legislative powers, limited areas of competence. It exercised mostly administrative functions, but see the Government of Wales Act 2006. Westminster Parliament continues to legislate for Wales. Extends legislative power of the Welsh Assembly, power to create primary legislation, creates an executive like Welsh Assembly, Government or National Assembly, change the system of devolution from conferred powers model to the reserved powers model. So devolution is basically a form of power giving, and when one state or a larger part of the state gives power to a normal or smaller part of the state, it can either be conferred or reserved power. So they can have one of them. And Wells Act of 2017, it implemented a reserved matter model. It was similar to the Scotland Act of 1998, and it introduced income tax powers. It increased governmental borrowing to support capital investment, and referendum is required for the abolishment of the National Assembly for Wales and the Welsh government. And Northern Ireland Act of 1998 creates the Northern Ireland Assembly. So the Northern Ireland Assembly was created by this act. And Section 1 describes Northern Ireland is a part of the UK. And Section 1 Part 2 allows for a referendum on independence. Results of such referendum need to be approved by Westminster and Republic of Ireland. And some of the reserved matters of Westminster Parliament, like Crown and Media. Northern Ireland Act 2009, key provisions. Finalizes the transfer of powers in relation to justice and policing. Department of Justice for Northern Ireland. And Section 2, Part 3, judicial appointments. Powers of the Lord Chancellor have been transferred to the NIJAC. Are devolution acts constitutional acts? Are they politically and or legally entrenched? What would happen if Westminster Parliament unilaterally and without a referendum abolished devolution acts? Is the doctrine of supremacy of Parliament redundant in reality? So these are some of the questions that has been asked in this slide. So we're going to answer them one by one. So the first question is, are devolution acts constitutional acts? Yes, the devolution acts do work as a constitutional act because it is mentioned in the constitutional act. And are they politically or legally entrenched? No, they are not politically or legally entrenched. They do have some significance on the matters of the state. And what would happen if Westminster Parliament unilaterally and without a referendum abolished devolution acts? সো ওয়েস্টমিনস্টার পার্লামেন্ট যদি একতরফাভাবে আর যদি কোনো রকমের ভোটাভুটি ছাড়াই এটা ডেভলিউশন অ্যাক্টসটা থেকে বের হয়ে যেতে চায়, তারা যদি নিজেরা একটা সভরেন স্টেট হওয়ার মতো ডিসিশন নেয়, তো এটা আসলে লিগালি কারেক্ট হবে না। কারণ আন্ডার দ্য কনভেনশন, সিভিল কনভেনশনের আন্ডারে এদেরকে একসাথে থাকাটাই তাদের এখানে দেওয়া। অ্যান্ড উইথাউট এ রেফারেন্ডাম, উইথাউট এনি কাইন্ড অফ ভোটিং, তারা চাইলে এটা করতে পারবে না। ইট ইজ অনলি পসিবল ইফ দ্য সিটিজেন্স অফ দ্যাট রিজিয়ন আর অ্যাগ্রিং অ্যান্ড ভোটিং ইন দ্যাট কেস, যে হ্যাঁ আমরা এখন আলাদা হতে চাই। ইজ দ্য ডক্ট্রিন অফ সুপ্রিমেসি অফ পার্লামেন্ট রিডান্ডেন্ট ইন রিয়েলিটি? সো ডক্ট্রিন অফ সুপ্রিমেসি যেটা আছে পার্লামেন্টের, এটা কি আসলেই আননেসেসারি কিনা রিয়েলিটিতে? সো এটাকে আননেসেসারি বলা যায় না, বিকজ ইট স্টেটস এ লট অফ ম্যাটার্স উইথিন দ্য সুপ্রিমেসি অফ দ্য পার্লামেন্ট and how the parliament works in different scenarios. So it cannot be said redundant, rather it is partially necessary for the works of the law and the things that law does. এটাই ছিল আমাদের ডেভলিউশনের স্লাইডগুলোর ডিসক্রিপশন।